Ben Bradshaw is a Labour MP and a big backer of today's Travel Day of Action. Good morning to you.
Hello, Julia.
Good morning. Today, of course, is the day when huge numbers of travel industry, leaders and ordinary workers from every different aspect of our international travel industry, they're going to be protesting in Parliament about the, well, frankly, chaotic rules that we've got when it comes to international travel. We were told we were going to have this green list, amber list, red list, and there'd be, a warning of any country going back onto amber. Portugal suddenly thrust on in a matter of days. Absolute chaos. Still only a tiny handful of countries we can actually visit on that green list. Tomorrow we get another list. No one's really sure what's going to happen. No one knows what the criteria are. And meanwhile, of course, we've been told, well, we may or may not be able to travel if we've had our double jabs, but we're not sure about that. We're not sure where. In the meantime, anyone apparently who's on the UEFA guest list will be able to travel into the country without really obeying any of the rules, including quarantine. It's an absolute chaotic picture, isn't it?
It's a total chaotic mess, and those hundreds of thousands of people who work in our vital transport and travel sectors, but also the millions of ordinary British families who have been separated from family and loved ones, in some cases for over a year, or simply want a foreign holiday, have every right to feel completely abandoned by the government that has broken promise after promise on its green traffic light system. As you say, hardly any countries on that list. When I asked why Malta, for example, wasn't asked when the last list was published, Malta has a higher vaccination rate than us. It has almost zero COVID. I just didn't get an answer. And I think if we don't see a big expansion of the green list this week, that will show that the government's decisions have got nothing to do with public health or data. They're all to do with politics and control. And as you say, allowing all these UEFA bigwigs into this country while keeping Brits at home, forcing them to spend their money here, I think shows that this has now become a highly political issue and absolutely nothing to do with public health and protecting the public.
And that's the key thing, isn't it? We saw this with the G7 summit, and we've seen this with diplomats travelling to and from the country. And again, members of the government having to self-isolate because they're clearly not social distancing and obeying the rules they're telling us are so vital. G7 summit, we've seen a spike in cases in the two places where the summit took place, and of course where the media village was, spiking cases. And again, cases don't necessarily mean a particular issue because they're not translating into hospitalizations or deaths at the current time. But when we're talking about people being allowed to come over to this country without facing quarantine simply because they work with a company that's sponsoring a football tournament, as much as I love my football, as much as I'd love to be one of those people able to go into Wembley on the final, it does make a mockery of this. And it tells us either what you're saying, which is about politics and control, or that actually this is just about following focus groups, that the public say they like these quarantine rules. It makes them feel safer. Vast majority of people are apparently saying they don't want to travel. They don't think anyone else should travel. And it makes them feel safer. And we've got this idea that there's this either or. We can either have free travel in and out of the country without quarantine for most countries, or we can have freedom within the UK. And that's a completely false choice, isn't it?
Yeah, a couple of things there. If you look carefully at the polls, the question that's asked is always, would you support more restrictions and more quarantine if they were necessary? And I think the problem here is that we haven't really caught up with the fact that people coming back from orange list countries, for example, are 1/10 as likely to be positive as the general population of the United Kingdom as a whole. We now have the highest COVID rate in Europe, and yet we're still putting people coming in from countries like Italy, Germany, with a fraction of our COVID rate into this country, into quarantine. They're far less risky than the average British person. I came back from quarantine myself. I came back from Italy myself just over a week ago. I did my 6 days quarantine. I'd had a negative test before coming back. I was far less likely to have COVID than the average person walking around London. And what people also don't realize is that Europeans and Americans are already free to travel.
Yes.
If you're in Europe or in America and you have a vaccine, or if you have a negative test, or if you've had COVID in the last 6 months, that gives you the so-called green pass to go wherever you like. Yeah. We are the only country that are still incarcerated at home in spite of having the highest vaccination rates. And we were promised a vaccine dividend. Where is it?
And that's the key, isn't it? That was one of the key things. The vaccine wasn't just about saving lives, obviously very, very important, but it was also about getting the rest of us back to our lives and living our lives fully. And it does make a mockery when we've got the vaccine rollout, is that we've got far more people double jabbed and single jabbed than the rest of Europe and indeed of most of America, and yet we don't have those freedoms. And it is amazing that the science in those countries for the COVID is completely different from the science in this country, which makes you wonder again how much it is about politics weeks. But there's also an issue. It's like you were able to do that journey. You don't have kids. You're on a good income. You're able to work from home. Millions of people in this country wouldn't be able to self-isolate. They would either not get paid. They wouldn't. A lot of people would simply lose their job if they weren't available to work, and they're just not at the beck and call of their employer. They've got kids who can't travel, miss school, obviously, and they're going to have only that tiny window in the summer holidays when they will be able to travel, when the prices will go sky high if we do suddenly get that freedom to travel. This is becoming a real them and us. So not only if you're in the G7, or if you're a UEFA hanger-on, or if you're rich enough or able to work from home, middle class, you're okay. I'm all right, Jack. But actually, millions of people who've been working their socks off this year, out at work, delivering all the stuff to the people who are insisting on lockdown, sitting at home all day, they're the people who are not going to be able to go on holiday. And particularly young people who've sacrificed the most. This sense of unfairness is becoming a real issue.
You're absolutely right. It really is one rule for them and another rule for the rest of us. I'm not so pessimistic about price, Julia. If travel does open up to the continent, the actual deals that are on offer are very good. And most flights are still much cheaper than they would be in a normal year. And yes, there's all the cost of the testing if we keep this ridiculous quarantine system for orange list countries, but you're still going to pay less than you do. I mean, I don't know if you or any of your listeners have tried to book a holiday in the UK in recent weeks. Yeah. There is so much profiteering going on, thousands of pounds for a caravan for a week. I mean, it's absolutely outrageous.
Well, I don't resent that. We're talking about people who are running businesses who've made massive losses for the last year, and they need to make their money back to stay afloat. So I don't resent that. No, but the reality is, the terrible thing is you do get better value for money going abroad.
Well, also, we're not given a choice, are we? I mean, at the moment, the government's policy is basically forcing people to have holidays here. People are entitled to a choice. And I don't normally believe in conspiracy theories, but I can't help thinking that one of the things the government doesn't want to see is lots of British people going to the continent and seeing that their lives have got back to normal. Italy, Germany, life is back to normal. They're free, they're traveling, everything's open. Whereas here we're still semi-lockdown, and we were promised this vaccine dividend. And we've got the opposite. We've got a vaccine non-dividend. And I think that as soon as the public realise that, there'll be a massive political backlash against the government.
Why do you think that we aren't as free? Why do you think we've seen a delay to the lockdown easing? Is it just because it's what the public wants, because they've been scared into thinking that this is what's needed?
I think the charitable interpretation is the government's absolutely terrified of that this must be irreversible. When we do unlock, it must be irreversible. And there's no doubt that Boris Johnson has been burnt, both by his failure at the beginning of the pandemic to have tighter border controls, but also his failure to act on India, which let the Delta variant in. I'm all for a very strict and tightly controlled red list. But the problem is now we've got hardly any countries on the green list when a lot more countries should be on if the government is telling the truth and following the data. And the orange list, as you say, so expensive, so much hassle, and most families could not possibly afford to go on holiday if they had to go through all those quarantine and testing procedures when they come back and before they go. So I think it's a combination. The charitable explanation is the government's just got this wrong. I think the less charitable explanation is they want to keep people here, make them spend their furlough money here, and stop people experiencing how life has got back to normal in America and in the rest of Europe, because we were promised this fantastic vaccine dividend and we haven't got it.
Really appreciate you joining us. Ben Bradshaw, Labour MP.